this is like one of the big disadvantages of replica training is because they're so specific, and if you make them with like the same sort of hold, if it's something that's super skin intensive or kind of like tweaky, it makes it hard to actually train on. And if you train on it, then you have to sacrifice like your session because you might need to rest more or like not do other things. I think that's like one of the main disadvantages. So like in the lead up for training for Excalibur, I was doing like standard sort of sessions, I was doing 100 move campus board warm up, like different sort of things where you work for up to hard exercises, and then so that's like an hour and a half, and then like board climbing, just general different sorts of problems each time, like 2 hours, and then getting into like the more power endurance stuff for Excalibur after like campus problems and stuff. And then when I actually moved into trying the replica, it was like try the replica for 2 hours, rest a day, try the replica for 2 hours, rest a day. So like everything else kind of gets sacrificed because you're just focusing on the one thing, which has worked very well in this case. But if like I think it could also, obviously you're doing the same holds every time, so you're having to take more rest to be careful and like not hurting your fingers or and skin because like they were super aggressive, for instance. And that was the same with the mutation one. Like I had the holds are so small for it that it's just brutal to try. Yeah, so that's like I'd say that's the thing. Like you definitely there are the big disadvantages with doing that over just general training. Because like generally training where you go and you just try different hard boulders on a board every day, for instance, you're gonna continuously just get like overall stronger, and then that will help with, for instance, like burden, but not as much. But by training for burden, I probably stopped training for other things.
It's this dilemma that every climber athlete has is you have one approach where you go very broad and you sort of progress yourself in a generalized manner, and obviously you have to have a good approach with that breadth, but then you'll never refine down and achieve your sort of peak pinnacle or your potential. But then you also have that bit when you go really down in a hole and you're totally focused, and other stuff is going to get, potentially somewhat derailed or not as good or as moved forward as much. And you've got to find your balance for you and where your goals are and where your motivation are and where you are in your, your career progression and things like that. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, yeah, as you say, it all just comes down to what your goal is, isn't it? And what you're trying to do, I guess. But yeah. I think like the best is sort of doing general training block. Like for our projects, it's like in my head what I'm thinking is like the best thing to do now is like a general training block and then like specific training before and then like go for it and then come back and do general training again or something.
Yeah, it's a really similar sort of layout and format that you did for, competition climbing, is that in that off season, it was a much more generalized basic work with this, basic strength, basic endurance, basic strength and conditioning, and then you refine it and you bring it all together right at the end. But you can't do that all year long, because in that refinement bit, often you're taking a bit more rest, you're doing very, very high intensity stuff, and some of those, foundational elements of your climbing or performance are slowly just trickling off a little bit, even though you're sort of polishing everything to bring it together for that exact specific project. It's just the nature of the beast, performance training, etc. You did a little bit of replica training, like basic replica training, before going out to Alphane as well. So it feels like you at least got a chance to learn and refine that process of how that feels and then what it relates to when you actually go out to real rock.
Yeah, so Alphane, that was an interesting one because I think I set 4 replicas at different walls, like at different points, and they were all completely awful.
I did think that.
Yeah, they didn't replicate the climb at all. Like, well, I mean, they weren't like specific at all because I was just going off videos, that like the videos online. I was like, all right, yeah, that looks about right. And then I tried Aiden's replica at his home wall that he had been training on, and like that actually felt pretty similar. And when I tried that originally after the first replicas I had set, I was like, oh, I've been doing this wrong. And then I like set another one after that, which was a lot better, but still not perfect. And when I got there, I was like, I was like, okay, if I don't do it and I go back, I'm gonna have to seriously change everything that I'd kind of set, 'cause they weren't really specific at all. They had the sort of the general moves like, oh, do a hard move off an undercut. But yeah, it wasn't in the right body position, the right feet, the right type of undercut or anything. So yeah, the idea was there, the process was kind of there, but the the execution wasn't.
And now having climbed on something outside, which has probably got one of the best replicas in the world right now in terms of accuracy and quality, and how well it's all been thought out. What's your feelings on what you get? Like, what are the real advantages that you get from training on what is effectively a perfect 3D replica of a project? If anyone else, I suppose, in some ways is thinking about replica training, like, what's the difference between the basic Alphane sort of got some moves, does something, to what you trained on?
Yeah. So I think basically normal replica training you wouldn't count as days on a project, because it isn't quite perfect. Whereas having something that's so close, like as I was saying, I count it kind of as days on the project. I count it as an extra 10 days. And basically the reason I think you do one or the other would be whether you think the project is like how close to your limit it is. Because I think the training I did for Elfing was good because I did each of the moves in like a variety of motion, so I was strong kind of through the whole thing, so I didn't have to do them perfectly. When I came to the boulder, I'd like overtrained the sort of the rough movements that actually, when you do the movement right on the thing, it felt okay. Whereas for Burden, it felt like for me it was harder, to the point that if I'd just done sort of the board style moves, I would have come out here and still not been able to really touch it because it needs to be so perfect and specific for the holds. So I think it just depends whether you think the climb's going to be a kind of limit project or not. I think if it's like a little under, but still like obviously something you're trying to project for a long time, just having a replica is probably the perfect. Whereas if it's something that you're like, 2 years in on, you're like, maybe it'd be worth doing because you just get to have so much more time on it without obviously like the worry of travel, time, like you could just train after work or whatever, and you technically are having an extra session. It'd be super useful. Not worry about conditions or the weather.
And do you think it's more critical the shape and the size of the holes being a replica of the thing that you're trying, or do you think it's the distance and the way that then matches up the movement that you do? Like you can imagine you could have the exact distance of all the moves and the orientation of shoulders, arms, etc. But maybe they're just flat 20 mil edges, for example. Or you have something which is not entirely the movement, maybe the wall angle's a bit different, or it goes through roofs or whatever, but you've got the exact shape and size of the hold. Do you have any, kind of opinion on what you feel like you get the most out of?
Oh, it's hard. So I think in general training, you want to train on like the more basic stuff. So potentially doing the right movements would be better. But it kind of depends how much time you could then have in the project. Because I feel like when you have weird holds, which is basically every outdoor climb, every time you pull on them, like you're starting to learn it and train it more, but you're like just using the strength that you've built in your actual training. And I feel like being able to train on the replica, I was already like having these sessions of like building in the little micro adjustments in the sort of finger strength for the holds. And yeah, I feel like that's arguably more useful, being able to like completely like destroy the holds and you just learn the moves after. Oh, I really don't know. This is a hard question because like doing the movements and having it all perfect is kind of great until you then can't use the holds. Whereas if you're like, we're really strong on the holds and all you have to do is get to them. Because I always felt like that's how I felt like as a kid when I used to train at the old wall in Edinburgh that's closed early not to. It was basically all just like little edges and just jumps between them. And whether I had my feet on or feet off for a lot of the climbs, it didn't make any difference. Because it was very much if I could just do the movement and get to the next hold, I could hold on. And I feel like that's more useful because you just build the power from there. So I think having the holds is better.